A big thank you to Vanidia Fortes, Handsome Banna, G83, and Bella for their support on Patreon. If you find that you're liking the video, please don't forget to subscribe as it helps out a lot, it's free, and you can always unsubscribe later. Awesome, thanks. Let me start by saying that this video is in no way meant to slander either Spider-Man Homecoming nor Spider-Man Far From Home. While I will be pointing out a lot of things I feel didn't work for me in those two movies, let me state right now that I do enjoy both of them. It's just in comparison to what we got in No Way Home, their issues are a little more obvious. So, before I dig into No Way Home and why I feel that it was exactly what MCU Spidey needed, I need to talk about Tom Holland's previous Spider-Man flicks. So let me take us back to a simpler time, 2017, with the release of Spider-Man Homecoming. So, truth be told, I still really like Spider-Man Homecoming. It's certainly not the type of movie I was expecting to start Spider-Man off in the MCU with, but honestly, I'm okay with that. Peter in Homecoming is a very unique character, one who is very different from the two previous on-screen iterations. We see none of his classic origin story, nor do we see many of the classic comic book side characters. There is no Spider-Bite flashback scene, there isn't a flashback of Uncle Ben getting iced, and most importantly, and admittedly the only thing I was pretty upset about, there's no Bonesaw. In all seriousness, when it did become known that Spider-Man was joining the MCU, it was a bit of a meme for a while that we were likely going to see our third Spider-Bite, our third Uncle Ben death, and our third even younger Aunt May. Which is why, when we were instead given a movie where there isn't even a mention of Uncle Ben, only a brief conversation about the bite, and where our main side characters are Happy Hogan, Tony Stark, and Ned Leeds, most people at the time anyway, were happy with what we got, myself included. As the years passed, this movie's reception has gotten a little worse, as has the view of Tom's version of the character himself, and I do understand why, but even with the power of hindsight and 4 more MCU appearances, which, yeah, did do things with a character that I certainly didn't care for, I still really like this movie. The movie just works. Even when Peter is using a multi-million-dollar suit, and even when he gets quite literally bailed out by Iron Man twice, I didn't care. This movie just has a certain charm to it, and frankly, I think Tom Holland really just encapsulates it well. I think the main reason for that is that in this universe, Peter is a young hero only starting out in the middle of a world that is overrun by heroes. And while I prefer Peter Parker to grow on his own and save himself, it only makes sense that someone like Tony Stark would likely seek out and help people like Peter. And even though he does get helped by Tony a lot in this movie, in the end, he wins the day alone in his own crappy homemade suit. He proves in the first movie that he doesn't really need the help of other heroes to get what he needs done. While the path to the finish line of a mostly independent and more seasoned Spider-Man was very different from the first 2 iterations we had seen, the end result was mostly the same. It's really unfortunate that most of this growth was sort of taken away in the next bunch of movies, but at least in Homecoming, it is apparent. Peter and his own journey aside, I found Adrian Toomes to be a very compelling antagonist for the film. The MCU never does a good job of establishing its villains, we all know that, which is what makes the standout ones more compelling, such as Loki and Thanos. There's a reason that the first scene we see in the movie shows the motivations and personality of Toomes, and it shows us his more down-to-earth human side. We see a lot about him in just the first handful of minutes. Firstly, we see his more old-world mindset when he calls the natives in the drawing Liz made Indians, and his capability to jump to anger and violence moments after that. Which, by the way, that guy had coming. I feel they did a good job showing that Toomes may be a little justified in what he decided to do with the leftover technology. Later on, we learned that his justification that he's doing so is that his family can get by. However, that's not the most honest explanation, as the house he lives in is not exactly what most, myself included, would consider just getting by. The only issue with Toomes that I have, and the issue I similarly have with Mysterio, and even to a small extent the No Way Home villains, is the lack of connection to Peter himself. Both Toomes and Beck have their villainous plans intertwined with Tony Stark, which I really don't care for. That aside though, I think the Vulture is a great first antagonist for Peter in the MCU. Plus, there have been few Marvel movies with a twist as cool as it being revealed that Toomes was actually Liz's dad. I remember the audible gasp during that scene in the theater, and it, alongside with the car ride scene, remains some of my favorite in the MCU. Plus, much like Peter B. Parker in Into the Spider-Verse, it made me evaluate my personal biases. The movie is also very lighthearted, and honestly, I'm fine with that. The lack of consequences in Peter's actions eventually started to get annoying in the movies to come, but here the humor and light tone really worked for me. Marcus from Cosmonaut Variety Hour puts it best when he says that it isn't really a Spider-Man movie per se, it's more of a teen comedy starring Spider-Man. Humor is subjective, of course, but I liked most of the jokes, like the interrogation mode or Ned getting caught by the librarian. Overall, I still think Homecoming is a good movie. With time, it has probably lost some of its luster it had, and it did set up some stuff I was not a huge fan of in the movies to come, but that aside, I would still put this movie at a comfortable 7 out of 10. The approach was fresh and had potential, and the movie left me excited for more Spidey in the MCU, and that's basically all it had to do. Unfortunately, my views on the sequel aren't as positive. I have a weird relationship with Far From Home. On the one hand, I can commend it for taking the cinematic version of Spider-Man somewhere he has never been, which certainly makes for a different viewing experience from the previous 6 Spider-Man films. But on the other hand, I don't think it was handled in a particularly good way. First things first, one of the complaints I saw a lot of critics and casual Spider-Man fans throwing around at the film's release was that the reveal of Mysterio as the villain was obvious. Now, anybody who has even a little bit of knowledge about Spider-Man's rogue gallery knows Mysterio, and should not be surprised by this at all, so for me personally, it didn't bother me. However, there were still a lot of things in this movie I did not care for. First and foremost was the writing. There are some seriously convenient things that happen in this movie that allow Mysterio to do what he does. The biggest thing here is Peter just not having his Spidey sense. The explanation for how is pretty half-baked at best, and while in the end it does lead to a pretty cool sequence of Peter beating Mysterio, it never felt earned. And what I think is the biggest issue with this movie is that Peter seems to be a complete moron in it. Ignoring the fact that he nearly kills a classmate, which is a really, really stupid scene, the fact that he gives Tony's glasses to Beck, who he is really only known for a couple days at most, is laughable. And yeah, I get that Peter just wants to relax and that he's been through a really, really hard time, to say the least, but this just doesn't feel right to me. I just can't see Spider-Man throwing his responsibility and something this big out the window so easily. We have seen a great example of Peter putting his responsibility as Spider-Man aside in a previous movie, that being Spider-Man 2, and it handled it way, way better. You know, back when this movie came out, there was a pretty notorious video posted by High Top Films, and at the time, I remember really disagreeing with it. And while there are still some things I still do strongly disagree with, in particular how he sort of seems to not understand how grief works, many of his points have started to make more sense to me. More than anything though, this movie just solidified to many the idea that Peter was nothing more than Iron Man Jr. in the MCU, and while I always found that a bit harsh, I can certainly understand where they're coming from. Peter doesn't really feel like he has an arc in this movie either, at least I can't find one. Is his arc having to reluctantly help fake Nick Fury to actively stopping Mysterio because he has to? Is it from him being forced to help to choosing to help? That isn't an arc. Peter is the reason Mysterio has the glasses. Stopping him isn't noble hero's work, it's something he literally has to do because it's his fault. All the damage and destruction at the end of this movie is quite literally Peter's fault. It was a pretty big message from Peter in Homecoming that if you have the power to stop something but you don't, they happen because of you. Somehow we went from that to, in this movie, Peter actively becoming the problem by just supplying the villain with the weaponry needed. The consequence of everything is of course that Peter has his identity revealed, and he gets charged with killing Mysterio. You can't say there are no consequences for his actions. Sorry, High Top, but you just can't. But that doesn't mean this movie's ending feels earned at all. I didn't even bother to write a part in the script about Beck here because I just kinda want to rant about it. Out of all the villains we have seen in the MCU, or most of them anyway, there have been few with quite a stupid reason to be so evil and just, like, conniving as with Quentin Beck. And I mean, I get it, he's supposed to be kinda unhinged, a little bit of a loose cannon, kinda weird and quirky, for lack of a better word, but I just don't buy it at all. Jake Gyllenhaal is a great actor, and he really, really does give it his all in this movie. I'll give him that. He is convincing as an unconvincing character. The fact that the reason Quentin Beck is evil is because Tony Stark accidentally hurt his feelings is just mind-boggling to me. That aside, there are just problems with the movie I have on a technical level too. I feel like the CGI is pretty flashy at times, but doesn't look the best. And the movie also just has really, really bad pacing. It feels slow. You know you are watching a 2-hour movie when you're watching this. Anyway, yeah, it has problems. Lots of them, in fact. Like, I get Spider-Man being strong, for example, but Jesus Christ, this bullet train should have turned him into raspberry jam. But there are some great scenes in this movie. Mysterio's initial hallucinations scene, of course, being the best, but no amount of spectacle can make up for a fundamentally half-baked script. The best thing I can say about Far From Home is that it did set up No Way Home. On a good day for me, this movie is a 6 out of 10 at best, but on a normal day, I'd give it a 5. So, what about No Way Home? How do I feel about what it tried to do for Peter, both personally and in the grand scale of the MCU? Well, I feel pretty damn happy about it. There is a lot about this movie that has already been said by countless others. Its praises have been sung by almost everybody, and while there are some things about this movie I don't love, it's really not a lot, and they're pretty nitpicky. There were definitely some rush aspects in terms of CGI, and they did reuse shots from Spider-Man 3 and the original Amazing Spider-Man, but I can look past that. It's fine. I get it. And yeah, I do feel there was a bit of excess fan service now and then, but frankly, I kind of think that was the point. I'm not going to break down everything about this movie and what it does, but I will mention the biggest change it made to MCU Spidey that I and countless others have been waiting for. At the end of this movie, Peter is finally alone. He's saved the day, both for the good and the bad guys. He did the right thing, and in the end, it cost him literally everything he had, and I love that. The fact that after it all, after promising to Ned and MJ that he would tell them all about what happened, he doesn't, is the most Peter Parker thing he could have done. Peter is finally broke and alone, and I love that, but he's also finally learned what it means to be Spider-Man. Not just a superhero, but Spider-Man. From Aunt May, from both other Peters, and from his own experience, he is finally able to make his own red and blue suit with no help from Stark equipment or input from Happy Hogan or anyone else. Spider-Man is finally a neighborhood kid doing his best with nothing and not thinking twice about it because it's his responsibility. The responsibility and struggle that comes with wearing that mask is finally present, and it's going to do wonders for Spidey in the MCU, and I, for one, can't wait to see Tom throw on the new suit in the next movie, likely sometime in the next 2 to 3 years. Far From Home delivered on basically everything I wanted to see and more, and it's just, I don't even know how to put it into words. It's just really good. It's really good. It's exactly what I was hoping for. Overall, I'd give the movie an 8 out of 10. I'd rank it higher, but I'm worried it might just be recency bias, and because the hype is just kind of still, like, weighing on my shoulders and swaying my opinion. There are problems with this movie, don't get me wrong. There are a few pretty glaring plot holes, and like I said, it's got some shoddy CGI and even the writing here and there, but overall, I'd say I can give it a comfortable 8 out of 10, and I don't think it's ever going to be any lower than that. It could be higher, but I'm just being careful not to rank it higher due to bias, because I really love Spider-Man. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, everyone. I'd be really curious to see what you guys think about my opinion on everything here in the comments below, and if you liked it, please don't forget to leave a like and subscribe if you want to hear me ramble about superheroes or anime or TV or movies more. It really helps out a ton, and I appreciate it. Have a great day, everybody. Peace.